Good morning. This is week 8 of 55 weeks of transformational prayer, coming to you from New Hampshire. We had a beautiful day yesterday. We were in the 70s, a little breath of spring. Today the weather is threatening to snow again and become a little colder. But thank you for joining me this morning. I'd like to take a moment to also thank all of those who are still sending in emails with their questions, with their comments, with their feedback. I truly appreciate that. That helps me tweak and learn from you how to better, present this concept of this 55 weeks of transformational prayer. As you know, in the beginning, I mentioned that these words come to me through meditation. So I'm along for the ride in the journey. And so what comes to me is how I start to learn, how Spirit is guiding me to open my heart, open my mind, and learn about the graces of transformational prayer through Spirit and sharing them with you, having that opportunity and be motivated to learn. So I appreciate it. Good morning, Polly Joe. Thank you for being with me today. And I see Neshi, and please, if you could, take a moment, if you would, and share this broadcast on your page if you like to share this with your friends and you think that this journey would be helpful for them. That's the best way that we here at Star Nations, where our live broadcasts are able to reach people that may be looking for programs that offer spiritual concepts and information and education for the audiences that are looking for this type of thing to start their mornings or evenings or their free time. So thank you for doing that and liking and sharing, because that's how we get to be seen. And I appreciate that. So I'd like to get started. When I had the word humility come to me for this week, again, I go back and think about the 7 weeks prior to this week, and looking at, again, how things are building. And to have transformational prayer, we also have to learn about humility. And when I first, thought about the word, I was like, well, how am I even, going to understand what exactly the concept you're trying to show me that I need to learn from. And one of the things that they brought up to my attention was some characteristics of humility, and you can see that there's a variety, and I'm sure there's so much more. This is just one person's illustration that I had found. And humility does, I guess I would like to say, includes a lot more than maybe what I would have thought. Humility to me is, being humble. Perhaps, in the Western world, we look at humility, I think, a little bit differently. Humiliation, a long time ago, the word meant to live with humility. But when we look at humiliation, it has a very negative connotation here in the Western world. And how I see it is, people never want to be humiliated. But long ago, humiliation meant to live a humble life, or within the act of humility, which I find kind of fascinating. And so when you look at that, you can actually, kind of understand why we tend to kind of avoid that, right? Because it does have a little negative kind of, connotation. But for me, how it kind of really started to break down was humiliation and pridefulness. And even sometimes I have a little, like with this one, how it says pride is concerned with who is right and humility is concerned with what is right. And I do agree with that. And I do believe like we should have pride in ourselves. So I think pride will come up in the next weeks because I have my own belief about having pride in ourselves and then becoming prideful. And that would be, pride is very proactive. Prideful would be reactive. And humility to me is very proactive, and humiliation would be very reactive, right? And we talked about that, and the Holy Spirit has brought that into me about living a life that can become more proactive rather than reactionary and reactive to things, and how that will bring us a better sense of resiliency and peace within our life. Because we all really juggle an awful lot in our life, in this daily life, and everything that's going on in the world, and trying to figure out how we best can impact the world. And that's by every day that we walk, we try to stay balanced, mind, body, and spirit. And it's a challenge, right? And it's a full-time job sometimes, right? For some of us who face an awful lot. And humility is about the ability to give up our pride and still retain our dignity. And for me, I feel that's, another proactive way to kind of look at things. This is one of my favorites, though. Humility speaks the truth and arrogance hides it. Because we have that fear of being humiliated in front of people or whatever, we actually sometimes go against the very grain of our gut, of our inner wisdom, of that inner light that shines within us. So fear and judgment and resistance, huge motivators that may keep us from being, coming from a place of humility. And then we get into humiliation, regardless, or we begin to get so far away from ourselves trying to prevent it that we lose who we are. So if we always we come from that place of humility, it will always speak the truth to us. And a lot of times we will be caught off guard through our arrogance to hide in fear of humiliation. And that to me is, the ego trying to separate us from the truth and the illusions that we see here on earth, right? So it's a very human conditioning. Humiliation, I believe, is a human conditioning thought. And so the further we can move from that understanding, the better chance we have of staying aligned, with God. And I guess I would like to say, too, humility guards us. I mean, when we think about the free will that we have and the power of choice, we wield a lot of power here, right? We can take or build people up or break people down within seconds with just our words, our actions, our thoughts. We can do that to ourselves. We can wake up in the morning and decide that we're going to have a horrible day. And more than likely, we're going to have a horrible day because those are the lenses and the glasses that we put on. Or we have the power of choice to decide we're going to make the best of it and look for those graces throughout the day. So with free will, we underestimate the power that we have to create our day, create the world around us. So much so that when we really think about it and we really look at how that webs out to our ability with our free will, it's, to me, it brings me to my knees as far as wanting to be humble and wanting to defer to God's will, because that is so much responsibility, so much understanding that I don't have the consequences of a thought or a word or my words, and that I'm going to be on point all the time, being a good steward of my abilities to be a human that is able to create. So for me, having humility, having that gift of humility is obviously a great. It's grace. It's grace to know that I do have a lot of power as a human to create the world around me, to affect those around me. And so with humility, I need to really not be fearful of being humiliated, because with that, I'm going to, again, through arrogance, hide the truth from myself. And then I'm going to react instead of be proactive and believe the truth of who I am. I'm going to react through fear, through the feeling of being separated or judged, or I may have resistance. So for me, it's, to look for the miracles outside of myself and recognize the awe of God in his creation, her creation, the creation. And humility looks for the interests of others and the happiness of others, and guards against that. And it means meeting people where they are and where they're at that moment in time. And again, not fearing that we will lose something or have to give up something, because that's really not what it means. It's about creating an indifference. Humility is about getting to the point where you can be a queen or you can be a pauper, and neither one you have an emotional charge of like one way or the other. And that's what keeps us in a place of good decision-making, honest decision-making, truthful, light decisions, whereas none of that is going to persuade us. So if we're wealthy, we will not make decisions on the fear of losing our wealth. That's when we become maybe greedy, or our big businesses and big pharmaceuticals and government and all those things, when we're through life are in, negotiating power, because we do all have power. We have an amazing amount of power through the choice of free will to create. And so how we negotiate our power is sometimes driven by the human conditioning of the fear of losing it, right? Or someone taking it from us, or that we have power, and how do we use that? And so having that humility is what keeps us clear and keeps us in a place of that divine reliance to say, you know what, God, I have this free will that you gave me. Look how it worked out for Adam and Eve. They had the free will to choose, and even they didn't fully understand the consequences of their choices and their behavior. The innocence of us not even understanding the true power and miracles of God, right? And even like Teresa of Avila, of Avila, she understood to look at the miracles and the birds and the flowers and nature, and to recognize how amazing everything is woven for us through divine intelligence, divine light, the divine wisdom, the knowing, right? And all the mystical teachings. And even the Essenes, they understood that God was law, and that, yes, they had free will, but they understood the power of what free will choice really meant, and the great responsibility that came with that. And so, pretty much their whole spiritual practice was prayer, throughout their day. They always, knew the importance to stay very close to God's guidance. And very rarely did they use their own judgments, their own, human conditioning mind. They knew the how do I want to say, the faulties, the fault faults of what we have, when we're analyzing with our conditioned mind, right? The fight or flight responding, and how quickly we are tempted, right, with our ability to wield our power, right? We see that in kings and queens and political leaders, and who is good steward of understanding the power. And I even think about like when we split the atom, right? And the power of those that are geniuses and are scientists, and this inspiration to come and do the things that have moved us so far ahead, from the dark ages, to the industrial age, to now we're in the technology world. But to recognize when we learned how to split the atom became two things, right? It could give us power, as far as generate power for heat and electricity, nuclear power, nuclear medicine, but it also had the ability to destroy with the atom bomb. So the human race, we have this amazing ability and gift from God to create. But do we really realize the enormity of and the responsibility that we truly do have when we use our power and how we negotiate our power? So with that, I always had this poem that I used to, read to most of my classes to understand how like our life purpose is and what we're really here to learn, and lessons and walk with each other during each of our experiences, and how we're learning about ourselves through lessons and experiences and our interactions with one another, and how we are separate from the whole, but the whole is always contained within us, because we're individuals, but truly we're not really separated, that we are a part, whatever's, in with us, within us is within the whole, and whichever is within the whole of you and everyone is contained within you. And so we have amazing possibilities, infinite possibilities of how much we are more alike than we are not, that we are different. Good morning, Tracy and Willow. Thank you for joining me. And Vicky, good morning. And Neshi and Nikki, thank you. And Polly Joe, again, thank you all for joining me today. So I just want to read this poem. It's called The Weaver. And it's, my life is but a weaving between the Lord and me. I cannot choose the colors. He worketh steadily. At times he weaveth sorrow, and in my foolish pride, I forget he sees the upper, and I only see the underside. Not till the loom is silent, and the shuttles cease to fly, shall God unroll the canvas and explain the reasons why. The darker threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern that he's planned. And so it always reminds me that, in life, we're not going to have all the answers. We're foolish to even spend our time to even question or wonder, because God is law. And what happens to us, there is a divine plan. We do have our divine will, and we do have divine will of God. And when we come here to default, so you have the safety switch to default to that, is important, because we only see from below here in heaven, from on earth, the underside. So we see the weaving of, I think of it as a counted cross stitch picture, especially the ones I make. So like when you see the back side of it, you have all these threads and knots. It makes no picture whatsoever, right? Some of the good needlework people, such as my mother-in-law or whatever, would make both sides would pretty much look the same. But for us normal people that do counted cross stitch, to see the back side, you have no idea what the picture is. And we do have different threads and colors. And that the master weaver, God, has a plan far bigger than we can ever comprehend or ever know until we, transition over. And then our consciousness is extremely full, and we're able to access that information. I mean, we can't stay at that altitude of that high consciousness, and our minds just can't handle that, to stay in that consciousness all the time here in the physical world. So it's really good to pray, obviously, for that guidance. Even like George Washington Carver, he was a great a scientist, right? He gets credit for the peanut, but he really didn't do the peanut. But his greatness came when he was in front of Congress and talking about how peanuts, can help people with healing and the importance of the farming industry and stuff. But, it's said that he said, "Lord, tell me about the mysteries of the universe." And God answered back that knowledge is that kind of knowledge is just for me alone. That's what God told him. And so later then George Washington Carver asked, well, then could you tell me about the mystery of the peanut? And then God said, well, George, that is more nearly your size to understand. And I don't know how true that is. Could have been just someone with some type of great storytelling for us to understand through metaphors and stories, for us to really think about the awesomeness of God. Yeah, Nesh, I love that poem too. It's one of my favorites. And you're welcome for sharing that. It's just a great way for me to put into perspective and really contemplate that, to have humility, that I'm just this one little tiny being of creation, but with the ability to either bring someone up, raise them up, or squash them down. And we've seen that in history, as far back as we can see, right? That the power that we wield and negotiate here, if we're good stewards, we do great things, and we have great leaders, and we have wonderful people that make beautiful changes in our history. And then there's others that have not. And we see that balance, imbalance of that. And so for me, when we're praying, to have that humility to understand that in order to transform, we have to recognize we don't have all the answers. And for me, when I realized that, because I was a great fixer, I wanted to fix everybody. I didn't want anybody to suffer. I didn't want anybody to be unhappy. I didn't want anybody to be whatever. So for me to have come to a place of, and it was basically out of fear, and I didn't want people to hurt, and I didn't want to feel the hurt of other people. So when I humbled myself and realized that there's probably a little bit more going on and in control, that probably has a way better plan, and that's the weaver. And when I came to that point of understanding is when I began to heal myself and let that go, and realize that sometimes what I use my free will to subject myself, push myself into, may not always be the best plan. And I can be avoiding those from learning their lessons that they need to learn. So therefore, their wait time of moving through something can take a little longer, and sometimes end up being a little more painful. So to always, when I am, doing healings or whatever, people are coming to me with their free will. Those that come to me for readings, Reiki, it's their free will. They come. And then with my will, I then bow down to Creator to allow me to be that channel of whether it's peace, love, compassion, whatever that is. And I bow down to the knowledge. And then I'm just that servant. That's all I am. And yes, it's hard to look inside and see Willow's writing that I'm not perfect, and that I go to my stories, let go of my stories, and then let God. Yeah, and it works so much easier. I mean, it took me a little while to figure that out, because we're taught through human conditioning a whole system of belief that really keeps us separate from what the true teachings are, and that's, always prevented us from joy, happiness. We gained a lot of frustration and fear from that. But again, if we recognize that we're here having a human experience, trying to balance heaven here on earth, and walk through all of this, we do gain mastery and understanding if we come from a place of humility. Because if we're always coming from a place that we know it all, and as a mom, for many years I thought I knew it all, and I was in charge, and so this one will make you laugh because hold on a second, I got to figure out how to get you out of there, and I don't know how to get your there we go, like that. So this one was really cute because my grandchildren and my family are going to come live with me temporarily. They luckily sold their home, and in between the wait time, they're going to come here. And I have a 4-year-old, and I know how to hide. There we go. Exercise humility and keep in mind there's always someone superior than you. Even a child can teach you something new. And trust me, I am learning that, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad I'm in the part of my life that I can actually have the humility around that I can sit back as the observer. I can learn and love in a totally different way, and really learn how to meet people where they're at. And as a grandparent, as a yaya, I have that, I guess, luxury, because I'm not responsible to form and get that child grown up, and it'll be fun to have my 33-year-old son back home and and have that opportunity again to revisit some of those times when I probably wasn't as humble as I needed to be as a mom, just always doing our best, right? And so those kinds of things will be interesting. But I will say the 4-year-old and even the little 10-month-old who's just happy-go-lucky, chill guy, I get a lot of lessons from both of them, and I'm grateful for that time with them. I love learning from the children. Let's see, let me put this down so we can see this. And Vicky says, I love learning from the children. They have so much keen understanding and innocence. Yeah, because they're, as children, before the world really grabs hold of us, we innately go to that divine GPS system, that God perspective, because it flows through us, and we can hear it so much easier, and we trust in it so much easier. And then, we get where we have to conform to society, and we have to learn that that's, nonsense, and we have to act accordingly in a certain way of social norms, how we learn everything. And so it does get lost within us more than we recognize. And Willow's saying, it took me 50 years plus. Me too. And yes, we are definitely a conduit. Yeah. And it's actually much more stress-free, right? That I don't have to worry about really truly thinking how that all works and the consequences, and how with our imperfect thoughts, allowing it to, to have the humility to defer to God, then it becomes God's perfection, right? We allow that to be overseen by the will of God, the divine will. And there is a fine line between humility and validations. Balance is essential. Yep. And, it definitely, for those that are leaders and those that are in power, our bosses, all of those kinds of things, or just as parents, we have power over our children. The authority of our churches, the authority of our government. So I think I've gotten everybody things there. Yeah. So to remember to think about those types of things in our life, right? And that's what I was like, wow, I'm really liking this humility thing and understanding what it really truly means. And the ability to detach from those things that, that keep me from, that keep me in a place of fear or judgment or resistance, that keep me from the truth of God and the truth of who I am and the truth of the Holy Spirit within me, and that keep me in the illusions of being separated from others, in the world and the animals and nature, or separated from God. So it's in this world, our children, are making decisions, because I do think that they suffer from a lot of what we try to keep, with the shootings and things like that. We really have to start looking at that, and just violence. People have this sense of entitlement that well, I feel bad or I'm bullied or whatever, and this is how I'm choosing to resort, to fix this, and that I was humiliated. So I think, even bringing this into the schools and starting to look at our younger people and figuring out how to help them come to a point of a place where they're not coming to a place of humiliation and reacting to things in a manner, but to fill them up in other ways, through humility, to defer and understand who they are, and perhaps I don't have any answers, but I do know it's got to start with our children. I do know that it's got to start in our schools, and we have to really take a good look at that, because it's becoming, in our face, on a grander scale for us to pay attention. So I always look at those things as this is a time and for us to pay attention, and look for a new way. So let's see. I think I went through over everything, and again, through the Ignatius studies, the spiritual studies that I'm doing. It's a 30-week thing. Humility has come up. And again, it's come up with the fact that you can be rich and you can be a queen or a king, and you can still have humility because you understand and respect the power that you've been given. And with that comes great responsibility. Or you can be poor and you still have humility, not because of the things that have been taken from you, but that you understand the power that you still have beyond the materialistic things that we, equate as being powerful, but that you have the power of how you walk in the world. You look at one of the most humblest people that I love, and look at the great things that she did with little regard. And a lot of why she performed such great things in people's lives is she wasn't attached to what she was doing, how she was living. None of that mattered. She had indifference to it all. And it allowed her to have that bigger heart, that bigger opening. A lot of the saints, weren't just saints. They became saints because they lived lives just like you and I. They had suffering. They had, limitations through their economics, their health, the political things that were going on at the time. So many of them were just like you and me, pretty much all of them. And even, Jesus came down and moved beyond the physicalities of the physical laws here through the humility of knowing, deferring to God, right? The Holy Spirit. In my line of work, let me just go here and show this. In my line of work, we strive to empower families to have the power with and not the power over. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. Because that's an important thing, at a very young age, even as a 2-year-old, we have to teach them about the power that they have, right? And they're trying to negotiate what that power is. And that even, when we become older, to try to balance that power is important. And how we really respect power and how we understand what that is. It's not an either or. We always have the power. And I guess what I was going to say was in the Ignatius, studies, I did ask, through prayer for Saint Ignatius to say, hey, these saints and everything, everybody struggled. And the biggest message that came to me was that we can be bound and physically chained by those that are in power, right? We've seen that through history, those that are enslaved, right? And then we can be enslaved by our illnesses. We can be enslaved by our relationships. We can, have an imbalance of power anywhere, right? And feel powerless or even humiliated, right? By people that are in power or that have some type of power over us. But what Ignatius, showed me was the one thing that no one has any control over, that can never be imprisoned, that can never be lessened or diminished. And that was the power that didn't own my mind, the consciousness of my mind. And I'm talking about beyond the consciousness of the human conditioning. I'm talking about the divine consciousness that I carry within my heart, within my mind, when I choose to activate that through prayer and connection with my intentions. So that's a beautiful, thing for me. So we're at 38 minutes. Again, I'm going over a little more than I think I should be. But anyways, I'll leave you with this prayer. And it's about a centering about how to come to that humility, that humbleness, either when our head hits the pillow and our humbleness is through the gratitude of how our day went, or it's to face the day that we have, So I like to, when I wake up in the morning, I have a board meeting with God, and I bring in all of the wonderful people that are in the heavens that guide me, Our Lady, Mother Mary, Jesus, and you can bring in whoever you believe, whatever your go-to people are, where you find your strength. And I use part of the prayer of the Akashic Records, the very beginning of that prayer, because I do believe the prayer that I use from Linda Howe to access the records is a very powerful way to act, bring me right to the records in the highest, purest form of vibration. So Holy Spirit of God, hover over me. Protect me today from all forms of self-centeredness. Guide my actions, guard my thoughts. Help me to cultivate the humility that I need to remain balanced in mind, body, and spirit. Through my gift of free will, I have a greater power to create in this world around me than I could ever comprehend or understand. I'm able to wield my power through my actions, my words, and my beliefs. Help me to be good steward. Allow me to use my power in a way that illuminates, empowers, enlightens not only myself, but those around me. Walk with me so I can feel the presence, your presence within me. Be with me every moment, allowing me to detach from those things that make me fearful of humiliation or drive me to be prideful. Guard me from those thoughts, those beliefs, those imbalances within me. Protect me from this by keeping me mindful in all times that I am love, I'm loved, I'm lovable, and help to correct those coordinates within me when I become imbalanced. And I move away from the humility of the awesomeness of your power. Allow me to shine by your holy design of me. Amen. And that's it for today. And humility is not denying our strengths, but accepting our weaknesses. And I'll leave that thought with you today. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, Sue. I see you're here, my sister. And thank you, Polly Joe, everybody. Yeah, have that board meeting. That's what I love. It helps set my day up because we're all have challenging days. None of us are immune to it. And it's a great way to just start out the day. So God bless. Have a wonderful day. See you next week. And thank you again. Please share and like this page, because that's really how we get out with Facebook through this, because of the algorithms are crazy. And so I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.